It's Patrick Hutzel from IntensiveCareHotline.com, where we instantly improve the lives of families of critically ill patients in intensive care, so that you can have peace of mind, real power, real control, and so that you can influence decision making fast, even if you're not a doctor or a nurse in intensive care. This is another episode of Your Questions Answered, and in last week's episode I answered another question from one of our readers, and the question last week was part 11 of My auntie is in intensive care on ECMO for ARDS. We're very worried she may die. Help. Part 11. You can check out the answer to last week's question as well as to all the other parts of this series of questions by clicking on the link below this video. In this week's episode of Your Questions Answered, I want to answer another question from one of our readers, and the question this week is: I was in intensive care ventilated for a week and I don't remember a single thing. Is this normal? This actually is part 2 again of another series of questions. The first part of the question that I published a while back you can access here below this video in the written version of this blog, where you're clicking on the link back to this first part of the question. So Philip from the United States writes: Hi Patrick, we have been in contact before, something about 3 weeks ago. I went back to intensive care for pancreas issues, and this time they did decide not to put me in an induced coma. Rather, they really loaded me with painkillers, but I'm not sure which one or whether it was Valium as well. On day 1 everything looked normal, but during the night, and I didn't sleep due to the pain, I started to have strange events happening. The first one I can remember is that the ICU is in the USA, but people were talking in French, which is my native language. Although they were speaking French, which is not really possible here, they were talking about medical cases, including mine. It was like if the brain was abstracting the English and just perfectly translating it into French. Then objects started to move. I didn't say anything to the nurses at that point because I thought it would be silly. On the second night it seems that I did some sort of awake delirium. It was so real. It was like being right there. I was in intensive care. I was hooked up to the IV infusions and I would see my usual nurses, but they would do strange things, like bringing children to show them the intensive care patients. Some of them would laugh about us. The worst thing was when some of the nurses morphed into alien-like creatures. I'm a big fan of the alien movies, and I remember watching the third one 2 days before going to the ICU. It was like I was moving. In order to figure out what was happening, I would swear I moved from my bed to the room's door to see what was happening in the corridor. I mean physically moving, disconnecting the IV pump, getting out of my bed, going to the door and watching outside. I heard the in-charge nurse asking the nurse who was at the bedside of me, asking if I was still in the zone. What is the zone? Is it normal to have such visions? This was scary at best. It's like being part of a movie you don't want to be part of. It's so real, it's not like a dream. Not sure how to describe it. It is like a real dream, something that truly happened, but I'm sure it did happen. In another hand, I'm sure there is no such aliens-like creatures in the ICU. What is this? Does this make sense for you? Is it something you've heard before? I understood it does sound like silly at best and totally nuts, but what was it? After this event, things came back together. I have to call the nurses on the day after because things started to move again. They gave me another Valium and everything went well. None of the nurses were upset at all. Looks like they were used to such things or reactions. They didn't explain to me what it was. I think they rather choose not to address the issue with me. I really want your help and I need to understand. Thanks, from Phil. Hi Phil. I'm sorry to hear that you had to go back to intensive care. I can tell you that in more than 15 years intensive care nursing in 3 different countries, I have seen many patients being confused, delirious and agitated. It's mainly the result of being on strong painkillers and sedatives. As I have never been a patient myself, touch wood, I can only talk about it from my perspective as a health professional in intensive care. What you are describing makes sense in the way that I see confused and delirious patients all the time in intensive care. In fact, I would almost say it's the norm of being confused when in intensive care. Your best bet is to read this article here as a starting point, or you can watch the video as well. The 5 things you need to know if your loved one is confused, agitated and delirious in intensive care. You can check out this article and video by clicking on the link below this video in the written version of this blog. You should also check out icusteps.org, which is a website in the UK for ex-ICU patients, as they are talking about shared experience from other ex-ICU patients. I hope that helps, Philip. Take care and all the best. So, how can you have peace of mind, control, power and influence whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care? You get to that all-important feeling of peace of mind, control, power and influence when you download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn quickly how to get peace of mind, real power and real control, and how you can influence decision making fast whilst your loved one is critically ill in intensive care. Your free Instant Impact Report gives you in-depth insight that you must know whilst your loved one is critically ill or is even dying in intensive care. Sign up and download your free Instant Impact Report now by entering your email below. In your free Instant Impact Report, you learn how to speak the secret intensive care language so that the doctors and the nurses know straight away that you are an insider and that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care. In your free report, you'll also discover how to ask the doctors and the nurses the right questions, discover the many competing interests in intensive care and how your critically ill loved one's treatment may depend on those competing interests. How to eliminate fear, frustration, stress, struggle and vulnerability even if your loved one is dying. 5 mind-blowing tips and strategies helping you to get on the right path to peace of mind, control, power and influence in your situation. You'll get real-world examples that you can easily adapt to your and your critically ill loved one's situation. How to stop being intimidated by the intensive care team and how you will be seen as equals. You'll get crucial behind-the-scenes insight so that you know and understand what's really happening in intensive care and how you need to manage doctors and nurses in intensive care, and it's not what you think. Thank you for tuning into this week's Your Questions Answered, and I'll see you again in another update next week. Make sure you also check out our blog section for more tips and strategies, or send me an email to support@intensivecarehotline.com with your questions. Also check out our product section where you get more ebooks, videos and audio recordings, and where you can also get one-on-one consulting via Skype or over the phone with me. This is Patrick Hutzel from intensivecarehotline.com, and I'll see you again next week in another update.